All right, so we're diving deep today into the world of medical diagnostics and, well, finances, of course. We're taking a close look at Dr. Lal PathLabs, that medical diagnostics company.
Yeah.
Their latest financial reports just hit the wires, fresh from the National Stock Exchange of India.
Yeah, these reports, they're like, a financial health checkup for a company. Give us a peek into how they're doing,
Right, exactly.
what their plans are. And this time there's like an extra layer of intrigue, I guess, with a big leadership change coming up.
It's true. It's like getting a sneak peek behind the curtain. We're talking about their revenue, how much they're spending, all those juicy dividends.
Mm.
But the million-dollar question is, are these dividends a sign of strength, or are they trying to cover something up?
That's the big question, right? That's what we're here to figure out.
Yeah.
Let's start by breaking down a key concept.
Okay.
Consolidated versus standalone reports.
Okay.
So think of the consolidated report as like a big family portrait. It shows us Dr. Lal PathLabs and all the little subsidiaries all together. The standalone report, on the other hand, it's more like a solo shot,
Oh, yeah.
just focused on the parent company's
So it's
performance.
like looking at the entire forest versus just zeroing in on one specific tree.
Exactly. And in this forest, the consolidated report, it shows us that Dr. Lal PathLabs brought in a total income of 6,821 million
Okay.
for the quarter that ended September 30th, 2024. Now, that's a jump,
Okay.
over 10% compared to the same time last year.
Okay, so their revenue's up. But here's where I get curious. Does that actually mean they're making more money, or are their expenses just ballooning, eating into those gains?
That's the question, right? While revenue increased, their profit for the quarter actually dipped a little bit compared to last year. They reported a profit of 11,308 million, down from 1,522 million
Right.
during the same period last year.
So even though they're bringing in more money overall, something's costing them more too. What's the deal there?
If we look closely at their expenses, a few areas kind of jump out. The cost of materials, employee benefits, those fees they pay to collection centers and channel partners, all of those have increased.
Yeah, with inflation the way it is, those rising costs make sense, but is this just like a temporary thing, or is Dr. Lal Path Labs investing strategically for the future? Like maybe they're trying to grab a bigger piece of the pie before their competitors catch up.
Interesting. It's an interesting thought. The cash flow statement gives us a clue here. They've been pretty active managing their investments, doing some buying and selling. Plus, they've been paying down their debts and those lease liabilities,
Right.
which suggests they're trying to, reduce their overall debt.
That's interesting, especially with their recent announcement of a second interim dividend of INR 6 per equity share. That's on top of the interim dividend they already gave out in August.
Yeah.
Just for those who maybe aren't as familiar with financial terms, an interim dividend is basically like a bonus payment to shareholders, before the year ends.
It's pretty uncommon to see two interim dividends paid out like this. And if you combine that with their efforts to reduce debt, it does make you wonder what their long-term plan is.
It's like they're playing a high-stakes game, really.
Mm.
Managing that debt, giving out those dividends,
Yeah.
and then potentially making these big strategic investments. But let's, zoom in a little bit on that solo shot you mentioned before. That standalone report, is the core business, Dr. Lal PathLabs itself, outperforming the subsidiaries?
This is where it gets really interesting. The standalone report, it kind of tells a different story. We see that standalone income for the quarter, it was 6,059 million.
Okay.
And comparing that to the same quarter last year, which was 5,458 million, we're looking at a jump of over 11%.
Wow. So that's even better than the consolidated growth.
But if the standalone numbers are stronger, does that mean that some of their subsidiaries are actually like dragging down their overall performance? That's a really good observation. And it's something that, people who analyze companies would definitely be looking into. It could be that some subsidiaries are, facing a tougher market right now, or maybe
Or
they're still in a growth phase and they just haven't really hit their stride yet.
Right. It's like some parts of the family business are just doing really well, and others are going through a bit of a rough patch. But so even though their standalone revenue was higher than last year, did the standalone report also show that dip in profit like we saw in the consolidated report?
It did, yeah. Standalone profit this quarter was 1,352 million, down from 1,509 million
Right.
during the same quarter the year before. It's still a healthy profit, but yeah, the dip is definitely there.
So kind of a similar story, even though that revenue growth was so impressive, those higher expenses must be playing a role there. Did the standalone report give us any more insight into what exactly is driving those costs?
It did. And remember how we talked about those rising costs, like for employee benefits and the fees they pay to collection centers? Those are even more pronounced when you look at the standalone view.
Hmm.
So this really points to the fact that Dr. Lal PathLabs itself, like the core of the operation, is putting a lot of resources into their workforce and that whole network of collection centers they have.
So it kind of makes you think, i- is this all part of a bigger plan? Maybe even connected to the fact that Dr. Manchanda is stepping down as managing director in March. Could they be preparing for some massive expansion under new leadership?
That's a real possibility, yeah. And there's another piece of the puzzle that I noticed. Remember Dr. Lal PathLabs Kenya? That subsidiary they recently shut down.
Right, right. With everything else going on, I almost forgot about that. Always a little sad to see a business close up shop.
Yeah, definitely. But what I found interesting is how the reports actually break down the value of the assets and liabilities tied to that closure. They're being super upfront about it,
Okay.
showing the impact that decision had on their
And the
finances.
transparency is always good, right?
Absolutely.
Helps build trust with investors and stakeholders and all that. But speaking of investors, let's get back to those dividends. They just announced a second interim dividend, right?
Right.
And we know they paid a final dividend for the last financial year that ended in March. So that's 3 dividend payouts in a pretty short amount of time. That's a big move.
It's definitely a strong signal. It says they're confident about their ability to generate cash, even with those increasing expenses and everything shifting around strategically.
So we've got their core business doing incredibly well. Even if it might be at the expense of some subsidiaries, they're investing a lot in their people and their infrastructure.
Hmm.
And they're giving back to their investors with these dividends. Oh, and let's not forget, we've got a new managing director coming in. What does all this mean for the future of Dr. Lal PathLabs? It's like we're looking at this puzzle, right? All the pieces are there, but we're still trying to figure out the full picture of where Dr. Lal PathLabs is headed next. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Looking at everything, all these numbers, the moves they're making, I see a company that's at a real turning point.
Okay.
They're definitely prioritizing growth, even if it means their profits might take a bit of a hit in the short term.
Right.
Putting money into their employees, making that collection network bigger, that's them playing the long game.
Yeah, it does seem like they're setting the stage for something much bigger down the line, even with the uncertainty of that new managing director coming in.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole Dr. Manchanda leaving thing even more interesting. Those are going to be big shoes to fill. Think about it, 19 years.
I know it's a long time.
He's led them through tons of growth. The whole healthcare scene has changed so much during that time.
That's true. That's true. And it really makes you wonder what kind of leader they're looking for to take his place.
Yeah.
Will the new person want to keep things on the same track or take the company in a totally new direction?
That's the billion rupee question, right? Will they use these investments and just go for massive expansion or try to dominate the market, even if it costs them more upfront? Or will they be more careful, focusing on getting those profits up quickly?
So many possibilities. It's like we've done this deep dive into their financials, but we need a crystal ball now to see where Dr. Lal PathLabs goes from here. Any last thoughts for our listeners on what to watch out for as this all plays out?
Keep an eye on that new managing director.
Okay.
That's going to be key. Look at their background, what they've done before, their style. Those are going to be the early clues. Are they going to be the steady hand that keeps things on course? Or are they more of a disruptor? Someone who wants to shake things up?
That's something to think about for sure. Big things are happening over at Dr. Lal PathLabs. We'll be watching closely to see how it all unfolds. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And don't forget, if you want to dig into the numbers yourselves, all those juicy details, you can find links to the full financial reports in our show notes. Until next time, keep those thinking caps on.